You can.
All right, I can go first. I guess for me, like I was like playing guitar and piano and all that stuff since I was like 5 years old, and I guess before I even started doing anything else, like trying to learn other people's music, I was kind of just like gravitating towards writing my own. Even though in the beginning it was like absolutely terrible, which I'm sure any songwriter has those stories of terrible songs that started the whole thing. But
Yeah.
for me, I was like writing songs. My father was like super encouraging because he was a jazz pianist. So he was always telling me to write songs and put lyrics to them. And then, obviously this is the super quick version, but from there, I just like started a bunch of bands that were also very bad, did a bunch of touring.
As everyone does. As everyone does. It's okay.
You got to be in a couple bad bands. Yeah. It's like a rite of passage.
You have to be bad.
You have to be bad. And think you're good while it's happening too. So that, and then I guess from there, like as I was like kind of transitioning from like being a performing artist to a writer, I was kind of in the headspace of like, I'm writing music in like a million different styles and I don't really know what my artist's vision is, but I know I like writing and I like waking up one day and like trying to do like a Paul Simon thing and the next day waking up and like trying to do a Kanye thing. And like, rather than trying to like combine it into one like smashed up artist project, I was like, I can be writing with artists and like help create their vision as well as like getting my artistic vision out as well.
Yeah, that's great. Ziggy, what do you have for us?
I mean, so for me, my kind of root and background in music started more so growing up in New York and living around just urban music, hip hop, and always a sense of like that feeling of looking for your favorite song was something I always really yearned for. I always tried to play instruments growing up, but never really, I think, had the ability to stick with any in one individually. But something I always loved to do as a kid was go to Tower Records like every Tuesday, and I would go in, listen to music, and sit there with the headphones on and go through albums and kind of be able to dissect what the artists were trying to say, and that feeling that you get of, oh wow, like this verse to chorus and that momentum that you get that gives you that kind of butterfly feeling was something I was always chasing. And it wasn't until I was later in college I started DJing and was doing some club nights that music became something that I realized could potentially be a career for me. And I was making beats in my bedroom, mostly like electronic music, because that's what I was into at the time, and decided to go to school for audio engineering at Full Sail University. And from there, I just kind of got like a really good understanding of the recording process and what engineers do and that side of the business, and went on to then move on to their music business program after graduating from that, which then gave me the flip side of what goes on in the business and the finance side and A&R and so on. Mm-hmm. And then moved back to New York and got my first internship at Atlantic Records. Kind of started from there.
Okay. And then at what point did you two meet? Like, was it through Shawn's project? Was that the first time you guys worked together?
Yeah. I feel like I love this story because it's so serendipitous in the way that we were kind of brought together. But I was working on another project with an artist named Kaiza at the time. Mm-hmm. And her manager was a dear friend of mine named Rami. And he, when I was in the process of trying to sign Shawn, at this point, I hadn't even signed Shawn to Island. And I was just very passionate about trying to find a way to work with Shawn. And Shawn's manager, Andrew, at the time, Andrew Gertler, who also is a dear friend of mine. And, sidebar story, Andrew and I met as interns at Atlantic Records, which, takes our relationship further back. But Rami, I called my friend Rami, and at this point, like my foray into A&R was still pretty limited, and my knowledge of it. And I said, I need outside songs for this kid. His name is Shawn Mendes. And I really, I was trying to prove to my boss at the time, David Massey, that Shawn was worthy of being signed, and Shawn had no original music at the time. So he immediately thought of Scott Harris, who he had met through the network of young songwriters and musicians in New York, and was like, I think I know the perfect guy for you. This guy's Scott. He is an incredible guitar player and understands singer-songwriter music better than anyone I know. And he sent me a song called Louder, which was a demo that Scott had written a very long time ago. And I was like, wow, this is perfect, like exactly in the pocket of what I need for Shawn. So I reached out to his manager at the time, Zach Gurka, and still his manager to this day. And Zach, picks up the phone, and Zach and I had never met at that point. And I was like, hey man, I got a song actually sent to me called Life of the Party that I hear your client Scott wrote. I think it's absolutely perfect for Shawn. And Zach was like, hey, nice to meet you, so on. Yeah, that's cool, but like, your artist isn't signed to a label. Like, why would I give a demo to an unsigned artist? And I was like, please, all I'm asking is just for the ability to have Shawn just cut the vocal on it. Let's just hear what he sounds like. No promises, nothing. But I think he could nail the record. And fast forward, we were all in the studio. We're actually at our friend Ido's apartment in one of his bedrooms. And that was the first time that Scott and I properly had met, and first time that Scott actually had met Shawn as well. And the relationship really just started there.
I love that. I feel like it's so interesting because I don't know now you're very high up in the chain of A&R, but like when you're starting out as an A&R, like no one's really going to hand you the position. Like you have to just start doing it. And it's the weirdest thing to be in a different position. Maybe you're in a different department at the label, or maybe you're a manager, or maybe you're doing whatever, but like you just actually have to start doing and start bringing artists to labels and then actually start acting as if you are an A&R to get an A&R role. So it's interesting hearing your story that you actually did that as well with Shawn. Scott, with your first sessions with Shawn, tell me how they went. And did you know right away that it was going to be like this lifelong partnership of writing together?
I mean, I couldn't imagine, like, honestly, where would have taken all of us, honestly, at the time. I mean, one thing I was positive was how talented Shawn was. I think that was like, he must have been like 15 at the time. And he was like doing some guitar stuff on like, just like covers on YouTube and like picking it up. And like, I remember like, there was like maybe 2 weeks in between one of our first couple sessions we had where I like, showed him a few things, and like, he came back and he was just like, like so much better and advanced so much faster than anyone I had like ever seen play the instrument, let alone obviously his voice is like always been amazing and it's developed insanely over the years. But like, I just remember thinking like, damn, this kid is like a sponge. Like he just like soaked that up and took it to a new level. And he like had all these ideas just from like a couple of small things. And I was like, if he learns a little bit more, he's going to have like the keys to the world. And it's kind of like been such a crazy thing to be a part of it and watch him, kind of take the world by storm. And, for me, I kind of just like seeing it firsthand is crazy. And like, I don't think I could have predicted it like this, but I definitely saw the potential for sure.
Yeah. And how much time, I guess in the beginning for Shawn and you guys all working together, like how much time was actually spent figuring out the sound and like figuring out the sonics of what him as an artist would sound like?
Sounds like a Ziggy. Ziggy goes.
For me, my biggest recollection was that from day one, Shawn, and then to something that I always kind of go back to for a lot of young artists as well. At the age of 15, I vividly remember sitting with him, and he was like, my favorite things in music and artists kind of references was Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran, and John Mayer. And that kind of gave me a bit of a sonic template to chase in that moment. And for us to kind of help, I think, steer in the right direction of finding the right collaborators who understood that space and understood what was great about those records. And from Taylor's pop sensibility to Ed's songwriting craftsmanship and John Mayer's musicianship, it was a culmination of those kind of three things. So it was never a moment where I was sitting in the room or Scott where we were like pitching dance records to Shawn to jump on by any means, because even at 15 he knew this is my path. And from an A&R standpoint, looking at the marketplace at that time, there was no young pop star or teen idol doing that. During that time period, things were very rhythmic leaning and very much in the pop space leaning more in that direction. It was, Biebers and Austin Mahones of the space. And Shawn kind of came out as the outlier who was like, no, actually, I just want to go on stage with my acoustic guitar and sing really, really, really well-written songs. And that to me was also something that was really exciting because he at 15 could look at the landscape and go, there's a lane for me here.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive. That's a very, very young
Mm.
age to know exactly what you want to do, and also to have the foresight of seeing that, that there is that lane. Because so many people, especially in the beginning, like songwriters and artists, but you spend a lot of time like chasing trends. And so, especially if that's not, I mean, to talk to most 15-year-olds, they're caring about what's actually on the radio during that time. So it's really impressive to hear that Shawn didn't care and he was like, this is who I am and this is what I want to be. I had a question for Scott. You've mentioned that you're really like family with Shawn at this point. Like you're his brother, you're his family, you're his mentor, you're his co-writer. How is that being so close to him? Like, how has that benefited the songwriting process for you? Have you like, does it make the process more of an honest process where you can really tell each other how you feel because you know that you're going to see him the next day, or like you have a
Totally. I think like the special thing about a lot of our relationship is the honesty and the trust of being like, this is good, or this is good enough, versus like this is gonna like raise the bar in a way that like we haven't done it either separately or together yet. So I think we're constantly like looking for like this moment where we're like, yes, like the world hasn't heard this, or like we're gonna surprise people with this. And it's like we're constantly sending like these little voice memos back and forth that are like little sparks of ideas. And I think like for me, I don't have that relationship with a lot of other writers or artists where it's just like, even in non-album cycle, we're still thinking about like what the next record's going to be like, or what the sound is. And like to have that ongoing trust of like, here's a really raw idea that could suck, but maybe it's just unique enough to be the thing that we're missing. And like, it's hard to connect with people on that level where like you just kind of have the same exact taste and flavor and like to move forward together like that.
Yeah, and you guys are both like, you have the humility to just like send whatever you're working on at that moment. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like you have that trust with there's no judgment. And yeah, I feel like that leads to a lot of creativity because so many times people get nervous in the session or whatever. And it's like, no, just send through whatever that spark is, like send it through and we'll take it from there. I would love to know how If I Can't Have You came together and the process of that from just like writing to release. So maybe if Scott wants to talk about the writing and then move over to Ziggy for the release.
Totally. It all kind of is like one long episode that we've talked about a bunch of times, and it is a kind of a crazy story. So it is an exciting one to tell. But I think it began with, I think it was actually it was like in between, like the album had come out already and we were kind of just like working on some random music. I went up to Toronto for a few days and we worked in the studio in Toronto. We were kind of like banging our heads together, and we're like, I think we did 2 or 3 days in a row where we didn't really like what we had done. Or we weren't feeling like it was the next level. We're like, oh, this just sounds like the last album. This sounds like the last time. Like, how do we make it sound like this and all this stuff? And we were like kind of defeated. And we went back to his house, his apartment in Toronto. And we just kind of started like after the studio, after the long day. And we're just like, what about like this? And it was like kind of the pressure was off. Like his friend, Brian, was like about to come over. Brian's like, Brian's coming in 5 minutes. We're like, let's just try this thing. I think we both like looked at each other. We're like, this kind of sounds like a Dua Lipa thing. And Sean's like, should I send it to Dua Lipa? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think so. Like, and I think from there, that was like the chorus of the song had started that day. And it was kind of, it almost sounded more dancey at the moment of the creation of it. And then it kind of like sat for a while as just a chorus and just an idea like that kind of we kept coming back to and being like, is this chorus really good? And maybe like, nah, it's not good enough. And it's like, this chorus really good. Just like, I'm not sure. And I think, somewhere over like a FaceTime one point, we like wrote a verse to it. And then we like got together and ultimately like finished the writing of the song and produced it, alongside Teddy.
Oh, I'm like, was he in Toronto? I thought when you said you guys were in Toronto, I was like, oh my God, that makes me so happy because the lyric matches what he was actually saying. Like, it's not like you just being it out. Like,
totally. I mean, the story is 100% real. But yeah. I think from there, once we had like a verse on it, we started to realize how special it was. And like, I think Shawn had like added some guitars like in his apartment, and we were kind of sending back and forth from there before we like decided to like really finish it and get it produced out. And then obviously the long path to it becoming released is a good story for Zig to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, I mean, I only had gotten looped into the conversation, like for the most part, Shawn and Scott don't like they formulate the ideas far enough to then to kind of bring us into the conversation. And it was one of those where Shawn just sent me a video of his session from his apartment. And I was like, holy shit, that sounds like a hit chorus if I've ever heard one. And we got to LA and kind of brought like the creative team in, which, at the time was Scott, Teddy, Shawn, and this guy, Nate Mercero, and finished the record. I mean, that was in January of last year, and left the studio. Everyone was, after a few days of working on the record, everyone was over the moon about it, super excited. And, we at the label started figuring out release dates and kind of planning the record's release. And somewhere in between us leaving the studio and, a few weeks elapsing, I think like many artists go through, you spend a lot of time with the record, you spend a lot of time listening and so on. And there was a bit of hesitation, I think, around the release of it, if it was the right song, if it was the right time. So, through a culmination of some trips, because he then went on tour in Europe. And, I think for Shawn, when you're on the road, it can be a little challenging sometimes to think about releasing music because things feel so big, especially when you're as big as he is at this point in his career. And it's like, I vividly remember FaceTiming him and trying to walk through mix notes on the record. He's like, do we really need a song right now? And I'm like, well, outside of the tour bubble, yeah, the world would love new Shawn music. And it's like, well, are you sure? And then, he turns the camera and there's 1,000 girls standing outside the hotel in Amsterdam. And I'm like, well, I mean, I can't really argue with that. Like, that's pandemonium. So Scott had been working with these super talented producers, OG Volta, that I always thought were incredible. And they'd done a bunch of stuff on John Bellion. And at this point, something that's happened with us a couple times with Shawn in his career is kind of having a fresh perspective, bringing in a new producer or mixer, somebody to just kind of like approach it from a different side who has fresh objectivity. And they came in and added some things into the production that kind of just unlocked it for us and for Shawn as well. And all of a sudden the song kind of came right back into the forefront. And, I'm skipping out on some details, not to make this a very long story, but, that was a culmination of over a couple months. And then, we were at that point where it's like, we're almost at the finish line and we're still a little uncertain of it. And Zach Gurka, Scott's manager, turns to me. We were driving somewhere and was like, I think you and Scott should just fly to Europe and just get it done with him. And I turned to Zach and was like, actually, that's probably a good idea. Like, because at the end of the trust is so strong between the three of us. And so I was like, cool, let's make it happen. And, Scott and I ended up flying and living on the tour bus with Shawn for a week, just tweaking the mix and getting it right. And my favorite part of the story is we were in Zurich or in, what was the last city that we went to? Oh, Vienna.
I think we were Poland. Oh, Vienna.
Yeah, in Vienna. And something that's really, really important to Shawn is to be able to hear his songs live. So to understand how they translate to the live audience. And Scott went up on stage and started playing the riff during rehearsal in an arena. And the band all just kind of joined in. And all of a sudden, Shawn went up, started singing the record and was like, holy cow, this feels so big in the room. And it was one of those eureka moments where he turned to me and was like, cool, I know what needs to be done. And that same day, like, I'm like running in the back we had set up a little studio in one of the back rooms, sending notes to the mixer as Shawn is rehearsing, and then he's sending me notes and back and forth. And then I know I have like probably a matter of hours before I can really get him fully closed on this. Shawn goes on stage. I'm working on the mix notes, then like bouncing out to just, make eye contact with him to make sure that he knows it's all happening. He comes back in and I had done a few more edits, play it for him. And he's like, okay, I think we're done. I add one more dB to that ad lib and we're good to go. And Scott and I like looked at each other and just collapsed because it was like a 3-month process to get to that place.
I feel like my ears would have been almost fried at that point of just like the time crunch, obviously, and also like flying somewhere. Like normally I need like time to process like a mix. Like you didn't have any. You just were like, okay, we're going to change all these things on a dime, and it had to happen. So
I do remember like walking into like, we walked into the hotel in Zurich or something, and he's like, damn, like Ziggy and Scott are here. Like, this is serious. Like, he's like, this song must be good. Like,
yeah. He's like, this is happening. I can't run from this anymore. Oh my God. So Scott, the lyric, everything means nothing if I can't have you. I was re-listening to the song earlier and I noticed that, which I didn't notice before, which I don't know why, but I noticed that that's actually almost like a pre-chorus tag. And then it also comes in at the end of the chorus, and then it also comes in at the bridge. But what was so fascinating to me is that like I've listened to this song hundreds of times and I've heard it hundreds of times, but it never came across as this like obtrusive or overly repetitive lyric. And I was wondering, like, you guys did it so well, but did you ever have a moment where you're like, oh, it's too much, or like, what's just enough, or how do you find that balance between,
Well,
you know,
it's interesting because it kind of like in the process of that day where that chorus was written, like that was kind of like something that happened at the last second. Like I think for the first like hour or two that we were like banging our heads against it, like the idea was like, I can't write one song that's not about you. Because it was like we had been in like a moment where we had written a lot of songs about the same female. And we're like, how do we even one up the song writing process of like, what is the real thought that we're thinking? And we're like, the idea of the song is like, I can't write one song that's not about you. And we're like kind of pounding that thing and like, I can't do this without you. I can't do that without you. And it's like, everything's in my head. And then like at the last second, we're like, kind of summed it up with the everything means nothing if I can't have you. And we're like, actually, this is more of the idea than I can't write one song. Why don't we try putting it at the top of the chorus?
Yeah.
And I think from there, we're like, oh shit, that's the thing. Like, that's like what's going to make it like go. And then from there on, it just like the melodic, like what the melody was doing just felt so good to like put it kind of everywhere to us, and it didn't feel annoying. And luckily, other people didn't think it felt annoying either, or maybe they do. I don't know.
It didn't feel annoying at all, and it's funny because like I said, like I've heard this song so many times, and I didn't honestly recognize that until today. And just sitting looking at the lyrics, I was like, oh my god, like it actually says it a lot, but like it didn't make me feel like at all like a bad repetitiveness whatsoever. I actually wanted to ask also about the background vocals on the hook. It has a tinge of gospel or almost like a choir sound, and I don't know if it's because of the register that it's in, but it makes the hook so punchy and like it stands out so much. Was that something decided in the writing process, or was that part of the production or part of the A&R and the mixing of when Ziggy came in and was going back and forth with all the edits? Like,
I mean, that wasn't in the writing process by any means. Like because on day one we're like, this is a Dua Lipa song, let's send a Dua. Like we weren't even thinking about that at all. But I think as it like got a little bit closer into production, and Ziggy could speak to this too. Like I think Shawn, that was coming from him a bit, where we had been listening and he'd been listening to like a lot of like Chance the Rapper type of stuff, and like he does that a lot with the gospel stuff. And we're like, how do we get it to feel a little bit more like something like Chance would do with the gospel thing? And like I think that was always kind of a vision even before it like made its way into the production, is like, how do we get it closer to that world?
Oh my god, okay, that's great. I love that. I love Chance the Rapper. Ziggy, what is the process like? Like, obviously we've talked about the fact that you guys flew out and you knew that this was the song, but like what if there is an agreement on what the single is? Like how do you deal with getting everyone on the same page?
I mean, for me, I can more so just speak on my personal experience. I think going back to like my original coming up as an A&R, I'm always chasing that visceral gut reaction I get from a record. And to me, it doesn't come often because I listen to a lot of music and I hold the bar really high for Shawn and on his records. But for me, it was like on this song specifically, it was one of those moments. And I can't, and I do feel like as A&Rs, we have a duty to not allow our artists to lose focus on records they write and that are their honest truth in their own stories. I'm never, and I wouldn't ever recommend, it's just not my personal style. I would never fight and push an artist to take an outside song that they feel isn't truly authentic to them. But in the instance of this record, it was Shawn's truth. It was his story. It was how he was feeling. It was a real emotion, and he wrote it with Scott. And to me, that was like, your fans want to know and want to be a part of what's going on in your life. And that was something that was really important to me. And I I couldn't give up on that because it came from him. And it was something that, you know, in the terms of the release and where he was in his career and in the middle of the tour, you know, I thought it was a very important record to be out. And it is important that music continues to come out for him during that process. Even though all the tours were sold out and merch was great and blah, 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 like it's all about continuing to keep him front facing. And yeah, as I said, it came from him. So I wasn't going to give up easy on a record that he wrote.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people watching today and in the industry from the outside, A&R, they know that that's the person that's going to get the music done, get it to the best of its ability, get it hopefully on time and on budget. But what they don't see is when the music is done, I think the job switches a little bit and you have like this part two of this A&R job. And what you have to do then is like you become this salesman or this evangelist for your artist and your song and the song, and you go knocking on every label head's door of like marketing, sales, like radio, making sure that it's their priority. Because you have hundreds of people at a label. And so you're only one person close to the artist and the songwriters and everyone a part of the creative side. But you have to make sure that the entire, out of everyone at the label, this is the priority. With If I Can't Have You, was that smooth sailing? Like, or did you have to like get out there and fight, like even within the label?
I've had a few instances in my career, specifically with Shawn and on songs, where the timeline that the label wanted to abide by didn't meet up with where Shawn's head was at. And I think there is a big portion of my job that is honestly therapy. It's, and I don't mean that like I know it sounds a little jokey, but like you have to, for me, like with him, he has to be as excited about the song as everyone else on the team, and 10 times more so, because he's the one that has to sell the record at the end of the day. He's got to perform the record at the end of the day. He's got to sing the song live. He's got to promote it. He's got to be the front facing individual behind everything and shoot the music video. And I've had moments with him, and on this one specifically, where it's like when he's pulling back, that's not really going to be good for anybody. So even if I do convince him at that point where he's about 65, 75% of the way there, the song isn't going to go to, I think, its maximum potential, because he doesn't feel it. I've had this discussion with a few, you know, I've worked for a few great executives in my time, and it's like, I've always stood behind the fact that if the artist isn't all the way there, it doesn't make a difference, because he's not going to push the record. So just abiding by a timeline isn't going to allow the financial benefit for everybody. So if you give me a few more weeks to make sure that when he turns around, he is over the moon about it, I guarantee you will sell X amount more million records, because he's going to go out there and drive this all the way home, because he knows how much it means to himself. And that's where I think a little bit of the therapist and great A&Rs comes out, because you have to understand where the artist is at emotionally in their lives too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go out there and sell it.
Yeah. Scott, you've came from the artist side as well, and you've credited touring to be a big impact on how you actually write songs. And so that you've said like you wanted to create a moment that people could sing, and that you wanted to create this feeling of when you write songs that it could be played in an arena or a stadium. How has that experience from touring and that ideology affected your songwriting process with Shawn?
I mean, obviously, my artist career is a bit different than how Shawn's has played out.
Everyone knows.
But I think, like, for me, when I was like grinding it out in the touring world, like it was a lot of like trying to get people's attention that like weren't necessarily there for me. I was opening up for somebody who had all the fans, and like I was trying to like capture those fans. And for me, it was like, how do I find moments for people to like pay attention who don't know me? And I think it's kind of cool to even look at that, you know, look at songs that way for Shawn as well, because obviously he's gonna play, you know, packed out stadiums and whatnot, and everyone's gonna be excited. But he is gonna, you know, tiptoe into the Coachella world and all these things that he wants to do, where like, sure, the crowd's gonna go crazy, but he's still gotta think about like, how do I like, gain new fans? How do I impress people? And I think like creating those type of moments in the songwriting process to connect with how it's going to come off live is like so important. And I don't know, I always kind of think about like, what is somebody who's never heard you going to think, and like, how do we connect to that person? And I think for me, that's how like the link kind of comes together.
Yeah. And even now, like we mentioned Coachella, but like, how do you connect with someone who's just walking by the tent or like
Totally
walking by, it's like in that setting, people come and go as they please. They're not even buying a ticket for your specific show. So it's great that you actually think about that ahead of time. Ziggy, do you have a similar approach when A&Ring like the full encompassing of the album? Like, do you want to make sure that there's these arena songs on there mixed with more intimate songs, or does that come into your thought process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it definitely varies from artist to artist, but with Shawn, it's in the beginning, for me, it was more so how do you garner the attention? So in our earlier albums, how do you just get people to give a shit? But now it's because of he's playing arenas and stadiums. It's how do these songs translate to that venue as well, while also trying to figure out how to get the boyfriends of the girlfriends who want to go to these shows excited to actually go. And that's like in the process we're in right now. We've had a lot of discussions about it. It's like, how do we get that individual, the guy who's going to be reluctant to go because his girlfriend loves Shawn Mendes, to be like, nah, dude, like music's actually dope. Like I'm down. That's an exciting Friday night for me. And that's a lot of what, the guys have been kind of diving into is how do we continue to widen his fan base, but super serving the super fans. And that's really kind of our main objective at the moment.
I mean, I think you guys are hitting it, so that's great. Scott, you mentioned in a previous interview that whenever you have something good now, that you bring it into a session. So like if you write something solo that you feel like is strong enough that you're going to bring it in to collaborate with other people, could you dive deeper into or talk about the importance of collaborating with others?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's even more so like I think like that conceptually, because I always find that that's like from session to session, that's kind of the most difficult thing to tackle. I mean, Shawn aside, but like so for me, it's like I spend a lot of time like trying to figure out what to write about before I walk in, and I feel like once I have some ideas like that, whether it's with another writer or with another artist, like it kind of like launches the session. And even if it's like the artist comes in one day and is just like, oh, I just have like nothing to write about. It's just like I have like some things in my back pocket where I'm like, can this relate to your life? Can this relate to your life? This is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm thinking about. And even if it doesn't, it usually like triggers another emotion that like sends the session in another direction versus like walking into a room and being like, so what do you want to do today? And then like you spend like 2 hours being like, I don't know. And like there's like this kind of discomfort feeling that kind of happens. I mean, it's certainly very different from Shawn to other artists and writers to me, because obviously, like I said, the dialogue is kind of forever going between us. But yeah, I like to have a few things just like check this out in a very like casual way. Like, I don't care if you hate it. I don't care if you love it. Let's just like have some shit to throw out into the world,
Yeah. And Ziggy, like how important is it for an artist to want to collaborate? Because a lot of times when you're signing an artist in the very beginning, they often could be just writing with themselves, just producing what they're working on in their bedroom, and they don't actually have a lot of these relationships that you have in the industry, and maybe haven't had as much experience collaborating. But how important do you think it is for an artist to maintain an open mind about collaboration?
I think it's really important, but I think it also depends on the artist, and you have to be really sensitive to where they thrive. And there's certain artists on my roster that I specifically work with and have signed that make the best music on their own and on their own terms and in their own time. And all I ask is that you have an open mind to try. And if you go down the path to collaborate and you actually are open-minded to it and it doesn't work, at least we went down that path and we tried. But I would have a hard time working with somebody who's just like straight up, nope, I'm not collaborating. I don't want to see another songwriter or another producer because I have no interest in that. But I think, at the end of the day, you have to be conscious of what works best for the artist.
Yeah. So it's case by case basis with them.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, being so close with Shawn, do you ever feel, I guess, like extra pressure when it comes to bringing your best to the table when you work with him? I'm sure it feels different than when you're pitching a song to an artist that you're not actually in the room with.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one of the greatest things about Shawn is his ability to like lift the room up. You know, like I think it's funny to like compare him because I just like, you know, was watching the Michael Jordan like documentaries, and I'm not, you know, the greatest in the world type of shit, but like some of the things that like that are so special is just like everyone gets on their A game when Shawn's around. Like he's like smart, he like reads the room really, really well. And like I think even if I was like having an off day or like in a bad mood, like he would know how to lift that. And I mean, I can do the same for him, but like, it's just like one of those things where like, I don't feel pressure to like, not like, I'm not going to deliver that day. Cause like, I feel confident that like, if I'm not, he's going to figure out a way to like, make sure that like, I can figure out ways to like, do what I do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And since we have a lot of artists, aspiring songwriters, a lot of creatives watching this, even music industry, or aspiring music industry, aspiring A&Rs, that are part of this, watching the session today. Do you guys I wanted to finish up with like maybe some words of wisdom or some advice that you would give, from your point of view to maybe a songwriter or an aspiring A&R?
For me, I have to say the biggest lesson that I continue to always tell people is to trust your own gut feeling. Don't wait for somebody to validate it. Of course, you'll have mentors that you'll look up to and you'll want, you know, some form of positive affirmations from. But the best decisions I've made and the ones that changed my life the most have been the ones where I felt something so strongly and didn't wait for somebody else to be like, hey, cool.
Yeah.
You got my seal of approval. Like that the overthinking to me, it can be a bit of the enemy. And I try to stay away from it.
Yeah. Scott?
I mean, for me, I would say like honesty and collaboration are key. Like if you're honest in your lyrics, you know, you can't really lose. Because I think if you're feeling something and you're writing it out in a way that you want to write it, I think there's a pretty good chance that somebody else is going to connect with that in the world. And I think the minute you start to think about what should I be saying that other people are going to like versus what I should be saying is what I'm feeling, is kind of where you fall into a trap of like, what am I doing? So for me, it's just like lyrically, it's honesty. And then like collaborating with people is always going to take you to new places, whether you like it or you hate it. I think you learn something. So I definitely always say like, even if it's uncomfortable, get out there and have a bad session, because that could lead to a good one. And, you know, maybe you meet someone where you write the worst song ever, but you learn a little trick and you're like, oh, I'm going to use that tomorrow. So
yeah,
kind of like what I would say.
So all in all, trust your gut, honesty in your songwriting, and be open to collaboration. I love all three of those pieces of advice. And I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this today. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, just so happy we're able to do this.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for that great advice. And I know that song is going to be in my head all week now, as it has been frequently. So congrats on your Pop Award. And everybody out there, please don't go away. Click through the agenda to join our next panel at 5:30 Eastern Time, which features 5-time Grammy-winning songwriter and producer Phineas O'Connell in conversation with one of his musical heroes, Glenn Hansard. See you there.